So I'm Philip Martin. I'm the co-owner of Philip Martin Gallery in LA with my wife, Portia Hine. And I hope that you've had a chance to meet Portia either at the gallery or at the fairs. I'm really happy to be speaking with Katy today, who is joining me this morning. And I'm incredibly excited about the show that we are putting on here that's about to start, that will open on Saturday, which is really great.
Yeah.
How are you doing this morning, Katy? How are things going?
I'm good. I'm excited to have the show up and ready, and to talk about it with you.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing, amazingly, is that this is your first show at the gallery in 4 years, which is kind of incredible.
Yeah.
We do so many projects together, and it was sort of funny because we're constant. I think I could even say we're thick as thieves. We're always doing things.
We are. I know. It is really surprising that it's been 4 years since we did a solo show. Doesn't make sense.
So in terms of doing a show, I mean, maybe we should just kind of go over some things, because obviously you've been in Berkeley for a long time and you're about to make a really exciting move to Berlin. But of course you were in LA for a long time and you went to Otis. So, what's it like to be doing a show in LA and back in the gallery, and where does this show find you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, LA is like my home base for art. So it just feels like I'm back home in art world.
Yeah.
When I come and do a show at the gallery. And like you said, it's very surprising to me too that it's been 4 years since we did a solo show at the gallery, because I feel like we're always doing stuff.
Yeah.
But it's a different experience when it's just your work in the gallery versus a 2 or 3 person show.
And that is true, because we did do a show, of course, but that was a 2-person show with Pam Jordan. So I mean,
yeah, a couple of years ago, I think, maybe.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it's always fun to do it, and I feel like this particular body of work like came together really well, really cohesively, and it really reflects what I've been thinking about living up in Northern California. So it's fun to see it like
a great place
into
to
Southern California.
So let's talk about that. So, we're just going to go through the show clockwise.
Okay.
Or no, yeah, clockwise, I think. So let's get started. When you think about Northern California, what do you mean?
Well, the work that I've been making the past couple of years, while it's still really focused on my exploration of materials, so I've been working pretty exclusively with like cast metal pieces and then works on paper. So while it's still really fixed on like just the metal as a material and responding to that with paint, or paper as a material and doing watercolor and paint and graphite and whatnot. I've just, because of this situation of the past couple of years where I just haven't really been able to do much social activity wise or like going places. I've had so much time to be outdoors, which is a blessing in Northern California because it's so gorgeous.
Right.
And the landscape really impacted just like my daily activities and what I was focusing on. So the ropes that I've been working with for a while now really, really started referencing the landscape and like the movement in the landscape, the fluctuations of not just the lighting or the color schemes, but the wind and how the trees and how the mountains and how the fog all are kind of shifting and just react to where they are. So I feel like these pieces, more than any that I've made probably in my life, like really directly kind of show my just observations of the landscape.
And obviously, just to kind of give people the primer, I mean, at this point, obviously these are entirely cast metal. And when you're talking about using rope, what you mean there is that you lay out a piece of plywood and kind of create a composition using the ropes. And in fact, you're in a really exciting show at Berkeley right now. You're in a lot of museum shows, but at the Berkeley Art Museum, you're in an amazing show called Lines of Thought, which is about gestural abstraction and has everybody, Pollock and Frankenthaler and all kinds of amazing people.
Just them.
Just them. And so when you're talking about working with ropes, whether, you know, we're talking about in a section right here where we're sort of, they're becoming a whole mass of lines, or we're talking about more something here or here, where, you know, it's maybe more specifically a certain kind of rope. And in previous conversations, we've talked about all the different sizes and qualities. And of course, from this side shot, you can also see that a moment like this is probably about that thick off the side.
It's thick. It's like a big chunk down there.
So, you know, tell us about when you're talking about seeing landscape and such. I mean, landscape is often defined by, say, a horizon line, or it's defined, or it's defined by
use that word.
a horizon line or atmospheric perspective. I mean, tell me about kind of what you've learned about your creative process and landscape and materiality, kind of through creating something that's a kind of, you know, parallel to what you're experiencing.
Yeah, that's a good question and a good point, that I probably shouldn't be using the word landscape, because it's not like an obvious pictorial representation of a landscape at all. It's more
I think you absolutely should be using the word landscape.
It's more like capturing the different movements and like what can occur in a place. So I think this is actually a good piece to talk about it, because as you mentioned the process, you know, I have these plywood boards, I lay down the ropes, adhere them to the boards, and then the foundry reproduces that whole thing in metal. So what you're looking at here starts as just a big metal rectangle, essentially. And when I'm composing them, I have no thoughts about how I'm going to paint them or what they're going to look like. I just kind of compose them.
Yeah.
And I get them back. Like, I thought this one was going to be hung in a different orientation. You know, I get it back and I'm like, oh, actually it should be this way.
Yeah.
Hang it up in the studio for a while. And then the paintings sort of occur.
Yeah.
So I really love how this one turned out, because actually when I got this, I didn't actually really like this cast for some reason. I don't know, I just wasn't into it.
Yeah.
And now it's become like one of my favorite pieces I've ever made, which is, it's weird how that can happen.
Yeah.
But I love this one because the way the ropes situate, it's like they create these pockets for different things to occur. So different instances of what I might see if I'm like walking around outside, or you know, it's almost like there's like sunsets captured in there, or there's like wind movements, or in the top there's kind of this reference to like this nasty sea foam that flails about when you're by the ocean. It's like kind of this weird dirty stuff that gets everywhere.
Really wrecking my Northern California dream experience.
No, it's good. I mean, it's all the stuff that happens. It's like really beautiful and calm and wild and dirty and like it's all this stuff. But then it's set up against this backdrop of this grayscale, which I like that hopefully makes people like kind of oscillate between going into the like falling into these kind of romantic pictorial spaces and like realizing they're just looking at like this flat board. They're just looking at ropes. You know, so it's like, what do you do with like these different like kind of beautiful relationships and very kind of almost like boring material reproductions of just like a rope and a board. So
well, there's always this kind of, to me, disparate moment between the casting part and the painting part, and when we talk about, you know, this notion that art making is a parallel to what you're seeing, it's never going to be the same thing. So it's always going to be incommensurate in that sense. And then of course there's a conversation about iconic or indexical representation as different ways, whether we're doing something that's, you know, in terms of dealing with that. And that's led us in, or led me in some conversations to talk about someone like John's or whatever. What's interesting in this
Yeah.
conversation is actually after you denying that we should use the word landscape, um, it actually made me think of Paul Klee, who
Oh,
is,
cool.
Paul Klee is someone, it's kind of fun since you're going into a German language area, going to Berlin. Of course, he's, Swiss, but he was in the Bauhaus and all that. I think that Paul Klee, I always feel like if I ever get there in terms of understanding art, I'll finally understand Paul Klee.
That's cool.
Well, because it seems so simple, and he uses he's like such a sophisticated figure in terms of using how vision works. And I mention it in terms of this, that
Definitely.
Paul Klee's making landscapes that are both vertical, they're flat, they're spatial, and in your work too, you're doing a lot of those different things and a kind of compartmentalization, allowing for that. Maybe you refute that, or maybe that's not interesting, but it's just.
No, that is. I hadn't thought of my relationship to his thinking. So no, it's helpful it's helpful to hear.
I can never understand Paul Klee. I'm obsessed with him, but I cannot understand him. And now moving on, this is of course the next part. And here we have on the left, an amazing piece that I am finally seeing after, a year plus of it existing.
Yes, I've hung up with that one a lot.
Well, because of Basel and all the stuff that happened, no one's had a chance to see this thing, and it is incredible. And so, talking about the way the ocean functions and literally pools in front of you with those dirty.
Not all the time, just sometimes.
Messing around. This is a beautiful, amazing piece. Do you want to talk a little bit more about it?
Yeah, this is obviously a big freestanding piece,
and you can see it's kind of, I should show a side view, but it's a flat part and a vertical part. And this is the front, this is one side, and then another side. So we could kind of talk about what this is. Sorry, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's okay. I love how this one turned out because you're right, it's totally influenced by the ocean, just hanging out at the ocean, right near sunset time, when I started noticing how the color relationships really, really make the ocean just look like the cast metal that I get back from the foundry. And then kind of seeing how I could position the ropes to reflect something that looked like an ebbing tide at that time, and pushing the color relationships of the different times of day in that place. But also then again, that's sort of that bottom area that's on the floor, but I like how it again travels upwards, and you're confronted with this really thick, obvious rope on that front face there.
Yeah. Well, look, a person who's collected your work, who I have really enjoyed working with, once made this comment that she's looking for a piece of yours that really had that ropiness. And I like that as a term, and figuring out what that means. I don't think I know what ropiness means, but I've never had to apply it to an art practice before. And I think figuring out what that is really cool, what it means. And this really has that presence, because the feeling of this is that it really is a kind of perspective line that's pushing you into space, but then it's also incredibly physical, and there's some sort of funny moments in that it's wrapping around kind of the base in a way, at least from the appearance from this side. And I'm a curator, your work's on view at the Milwaukee Art Museum, but it's also been collected in a lot of other areas in the upper Midwest. And a former great curator at Gabe Ritter, who was at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, who's now at UC Santa Barbara, made an amazing point about how in some of your sculptures, the rope can also serve to kind of hold the sculpture up itself. It can kind of function as a base. So here we have this piece where you have this kind of flowing, well, you can express it better than me. I'll stop.
No, it's true. I think what Gabe pointed out, sometimes the rope just serves a really practical function. And in this case, while the rope's not totally just like cut out, the board is left intact that it was affixed to, it kind of dictated the form, you know, that big L shape. And then
What do you
I
mean
just
by
let
that? How did the rope dictate the form?
Well, you know, it's like I had to construct the piece. I had originally planned to cut out all the board around this piece, so it was just that rope standing up.
Got it.
But then just seeing the cast, I decided to keep that board, so because I liked that space not only on the front, you know, that
Mhm.
worked as like this big kind of grayscale pictorial space, but
Mhm.
the back was really um, an exciting part for me to paint.
Yeah.
So that to have all these different things going on, that front uh, big rope part that we're looking at now, that it has like that kind of ropiness that folds into that
Mhm.
the piece on the floor, but then the back, if you could flip to that slide, I mean, that became just how I kind of do like my drawings. It just
Yeah.
became a totally blank space. There's no
Yeah.
rope that I'm like kind of responding to with paint. And I love how it just became so much looser on the back compared to the
Yeah.
front. It's just like a totally different painting relationship.
Well, it's, goes without saying, obviously, that people need to see the show if they can. And we are open, obviously we have our Omicron thing going on here, as we all do. So it's masked, and you will be at the gallery on Saturday from 2 to 5. If anyone wants to come by, that's our opening. And people can, of course, come anytime, but if they might like to see you. I just wanted to point out, like, I think one of the things, like, also when you see this piece in person, is like the way it's all painted up and down here, like, and I'm trying to show that edge with the cursor.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
you kind of, on some of these pieces, I mean, you end up in these amazing sort of zones in the work, or focusing on these areas, be it with the graphite or with the paint. That's just, yeah, they really sort of absorb you in these different places.
Oh, thanks. I mean, that's nice to hear. You always told me I was good about doing details, so I'm always like, oh gosh, I gotta do the details. I have to keep, or I have to like fulfill what Philip likes about this.
There is
to
a
not to not stop early, because it's hard, you know, with these pieces you can really just paint them, but to get in and do all those little minor details with graphite or little hints of paint, it really just kind of completes them for sure.
So there's actually a really good question in the chat that's from Tessa, who
Oh,
says, you described not being super enthusiastic about the bare metal of that earlier wall piece before painting it. I love this, because I think this is your point. This is the point. Like, things that are challenging get to be really exciting, and they can really change things. So this is what Tess is saying. How do
okay.
you continue engaging with the work in process when you find yourself at odds with it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's like it's a weird process, Tessa, because I get all these pieces back. You know, I compose them, take them to the foundry, get them back, and I have completely opposite reactions to them than when I first dropped them off.
Yeah.
Like this piece, I had not planned for this to be a diptych, but I got it back and laid it out. I'm like, oh, it's obviously a diptych. It's so obvious. And the way, you know, I painted it, it actually came out kind of faster than I would have imagined, where that other piece that I had mentioned that I wasn't enthusiastic when I got it back, it took work to be like, how can I orient this differently? What's going on with this? I have to sit with this. And after time, you know, after I kind of grapple with just like this thing,
Mm-hmm.
the painting sort of comes out of just sitting with it, honestly.
Right.
Something I really love about the process of working with metal, I mean, I used to paint on canvases and I just wasn't happy with my relationship to painting. I love painting. I just
Mm-hmm.
wasn't happy with just like a flat canvas as a surface, because I always just was building stuff um, from a canvas, you know, is creating a composition from just flat space.
Mm-hmm.
Where with these, I have to compose them. I have to take them to the foundry. I have to get them back, hang them up, you know, have like this other relationship. And then to deal with this kind of three-dimensional relief surface, the painting really just comes out of that. So
Yeah.
it's a totally different relationship for me than just being presented with a canvas on the wall. And
Yeah.
I like that, figuring that out. I like not I have no idea what these paintings will look like, or what these pieces will look like once I
Yeah.
get them back from the foundry. So it's just like a constant working through in
Well, this
different
piece is,
levels.
I mean, you mentioned that it became a diptych. I mean, are we allowed to call it a fliptych?
Sure, yes. I don't know. Yeah, why not?
Because, obviously that's what's happened. And
Yeah,
I think that's what it is when you're not making a systematic artwork. I mean, when I was in school, a
yeah,
systematic artwork was the enemy. And that's what we were told not, that's what my great teacher told us not to do. And that is incredibly challenging, but very meaningful. If you don't know what a work's going to look like when you start it, it's a very different process than something you start that you know exactly what it's going to look like at the end. And it's just a matter of carrying it through. Um,
yeah, definitely.
so, and it's interesting too, like in terms of the painting here, that's just this gorgeous, that could be something flying in front of the sky, or it's so many different ways of painting and so many different ways of engaging with it in terms of reading distance, like what you're seeing at a distance, what you see close up. There's a lot of different moments. I love this detail.
Oh yeah, that one's nice.
That's a great detail, and really helps one really enjoy this sort of central band in it that from a distance, one really sees.
Oh yeah, that big purple band that goes through
Mhm.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. When I painted that, I was like, all right, it's a diptych. Like now
Yeah.
they can't be separated. Or
Well, this one, I think because of that purple band, you're able to engage with the shape and the outer size of it in a way that I've never really quite seen you do before. Do you know what I mean? In
Mhm.
terms of the size of that shape in relationship to the whole, it's about 1/3 or 1/4 of the whole thing is one
Yeah,
coherent um, shape.
it's true. Yeah, I haven't done that before. This one feels so different than other pieces. That's why I think I'm like really excited about that diptych in particular.
So talking about things you haven't done before, let's move on to this massive, the
The
massive
mega
rope.
rope.
Yeah, mega rope. And
Yeah.
this is also the first piece that was, we mentioned the show at Berkeley and the current presentation of the Milwaukee Art Museum. This piece is kind of interesting because it was on view at the Chris Bellert Museum in Florida.
Yeah.
And so, this is a show where some things have come together from some different moments in some different places. This one it's huge. It's like this thick.
I know.
Tell
I
us
know my
about
friend
what.
who helped me hang it, like put her arm next to it, and they were like the same.
Yeah, here's a
So
sense
good.
of just with Scott,
Oh, there's Scott.
a sense of scale of literally how big this thing is. Do you want to
Mhm.
talk a little bit about? I loved your description of how you kind of got started on this thing because
Oh
you're kind of
yeah.
like, well, let's start with these little tape areas. So I'm like, wait.
Yeah, no, it's true. I had a friend who gave me this piece of rope, which was the biggest, like thickest rope I've ever had cast before.
Uh-huh.
And he gave it to me. I'm like, I know exactly what I'm gonna do with it because I have this show in Florida. I'm gonna make a big piece. I've always wanted to make a piece like this,
Mhm.
and it'll just be, I mean, it'll just be like a line drawing because this
Yeah.
thing is so thick. So it was really interesting to lay out just in the studio because you can see it's obviously three separate casts that all hang together.
Mhm.
Um, and as we've said, the rope is really thick. So this is the ropiness thing you brought up. It's like such a rope. I mean, more than I think any other piece I've done. So when I got it back, it was actually really hard.
Yeah.
Um, so the other pieces we've looked at, they're on boards and they kind of break up these different pictorial spaces or options. Where this one was just like, here's a rope. What are you gonna paint? What are you gonna do with this?
Yeah.
And what you brought up, I actually just started with. I had to tape off the ends for the foundry so it wouldn't fray out too much.
Uh-huh.
Like you guys can see on the left, and the right, there's like a blue end on the left and a red end on the right. And those are actually just cast of the like painter's tape I had to use to make it not fray for the casting process. And I honestly began from like those tape ends because like the rope was like too daunting.
Yeah.
I just didn't know where to start. And then it all kind of came together from there. It just became a much like simpler color composition. I just didn't do too much color on the ropes, which get pretty wild on the panels. But then flipping into these grayscale moments, I had a couple of spaces to do kind of other painting moments on that left part of the piece where it looks like the suns are kind of coming up and down. So I'm glad I had those spaces as well, so it wasn't only rope. But it was really pulling out these different, I guess, like capacities in the rope, like on the grayscale, using graphite to highlight it so it almost looks like an illustration of a rope. But it was a difficult piece to work with, but I figured it out. Like I'm really happy with how it turned out. But it was definitely one of the hardest painting questions for me in the studio.
So I usually cut these off at 9:30, and
is it 9:30?
would be about when I do it. But
Okay.
I still have a few more things I'd like to ask you. So
Yeah, that's fine.
With your permission, maybe we could go for 10 more minutes here.
That's cool. Yeah.
Okay.
We're not doing anything.
So I think this is interesting because we were talking about this area in the rope yesterday, because it still manages to be obviously very pictorial, and I think and you have almost this kind of framing for it. And this is really functioning within the pictorial sense. Like it's not just a painted frame, but rather part of this sculptural picture. But then, as you're pointing out, or as it very much like is still this sculptural thing. It's really I think this piece is really quite remarkable.
Thank you. Yeah, and I love seeing this piece from the side. I know there's an image, but like if people are able to come to the gallery just to see it, just to see the thickness of it and its like physical body is really important, I think, for this piece.
So Linda has a really good question too, just in the chat.
Oh, cool. Sorry, yeah, I'm not seeing the questions.
Oh, it's all right. She's asking, she says, so do you call them paintings? When you were composing the diptych, were you composing these two pieces on the table next to each other?
Oh, nice. Yeah. First of all, just these are always like on the wall, so they're not on a table when I'm working on them in the studio. Probably only because I don't have a table set up for that, and because they're heavy. I mean, they're not crazy heavy, but once they're on the wall, they're not moving for a while. Say that. It's not like I'm gonna take this down. It's like
okay.
Pounds.
Sure.
But yeah, are they paintings? I don't know. Sometimes I call them paintings. Sometimes I call them sculptures. Sometimes I call them drawings, or painting sculptures. It really, I don't know what they are.
Yeah.
Because I guess technically they're a sculpture because they're cast metal, but
yeah,
they're so obviously paintings, but also drawing because of the graphite. So I like how they're
I think Linda's question is a really good one, because I think what's really exciting is that they can kind of be all of these things at the same time. And I think it's really interesting that they're both that way to you as a viewer or as a maker, and that way to us as viewers, because as a maker, as you point out, Linda's pointing to this moment, like we're composing here, like what is that? What's that moment? What are you calling it? And at that moment, maybe it is a painting. At other moments, it seems like it's a sculpture. Like I think this, and it's also a drawing. And as viewers, I think what's really interesting is that your work is, for me, first of all, if you've ever made any art at all, it's a lot. You can really understand how challenging this is, because it's really hard to be in these different spaces, these painting mindsets, these sculpture mindsets, and the incommensurability in the process, where all of a sudden you're going down this process that I imagine as being like Linda Benglis or something. And I'm not, we could compare, but I love Linda Benglis, so I always like to talk
She's
about Linda
awesome,
Benglis.
obviously.
Just because she's so hard rock and she lets anything be a part of her practice. And that's just incredibly inspiring. So to me, it's like, we're headed down this path, we're composing the ropes, we're doing this thing. Now, all of a sudden, it's going somewhere else. There's a caster involved. They're taking it. They're putting this like period, so to speak, moment on it. The casts in this moment on this giant rope, that tape in the cast is fantastic because the rope is like this big, but the tape is like that. Anyway, and then it comes
I'm glad
back.
you like it because I'm always like, I shouldn't be like having this tape cast, but
That's way too far in the past.
I kind of like it. I don't know.
We've seen so many cast nails and the rest of it in here. It's like,
I know.
and so anyway, then you have this thing where then you start painting on it. And of course, like it's this whole other thing. So as a maker, to me, it's super mind-boggling. And then as a viewer, it's really, I think it's really exciting because there's this moment of absolute immediacy and this moment of like, it's almost like you've captured time. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I'm trying. Yeah, that's nice to hear. I'm trying to.
I'll stop.
No, that's true because I'm trying to. It's like I'm trying to capture. It's one thing to like seize the ropes, in metal, and like capture them that way.
Yeah.
But then to also try and portray a different time, during the day or time you put into the studio. To capture that in paint is a really fun challenge, and I think or hope the works do that. And then to also like push it even further in graphite, so it's like a constant attempt to do that. So it's nice to hear.
Well, they become
that's actually
yours.
seen.
They become yours as you transform. It goes back to the point that Tessa made. Andrew raised his hand, but I'm too Zoom incompetent to even know what that means. My son could do this, but Andrew, I want to know what you want, but I don't know how to do it. But if you put it in the chat, then I think I can handle it. Now, Linda has pointed out, since they're on the vertical wall, how do the ropes stay?
Oh yeah, good question.
And she also points out that the tape is like a Duchamp moment, which is super awesome. How do the ropes stay on the wall? Like, what is that? How does that work?
Sure, yeah, and it's confusing if you haven't seen these pieces, or maybe it's confusing even if you have. Linda, did you say Linda said that?
Mm-hmm.
So Linda, what you're seeing, everything is actually metal.
Yeah.
So basically I put the ropes on boards, adhere them to boards, and then have those cast. So the ropes can't fall off because everything that you're looking, besides the drawings in this shot, it's all metal, so it's fixed, so it can't.
But Linda's point also, since we don't know exactly, is also good with regard to, but when you're even making them, because it's an interesting point. Because are you
how do they not fall off when I'm like composing them?
Well, yeah, like are you making them flat?
They're all composed on the floor.
So then, in another whole transposition is that they were made on the floor. So they live on the wall.
Made on the floor.
They live on the wall, but they were made on the floor. So there's another weird.
Yeah, that's probably why I don't know how I'm going to paint them, because they're always just on the ground. That's true.
And so then when they're on the floor, then you nail into them so that at that point they don't move.
Yeah, for the casting process.
Because this is a piece that to me is so exciting. And it's a piece that is actually an older piece. Mm-hmm. We don't normally necessarily do this, but this is a major work that I had not really had a chance to spend time with. And it's very tall, as people can see.
Yeah, I love that.
And it, as Linda, it's just got this like vertiginous, like it's quite. Tell me a little bit about making this piece, because it is perhaps, it's a little bit older in terms of where you are now, but still very contiguous. Does it look older or feel different? And what does this piece feel like to you, or what?
It doesn't actually feel different in relation to just seeing all that work together.
Yeah.
I made it for a show at Kate Wirbel's space in New York. I think it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And the only difference I think in my thinking from that show to this was that I was for that show, I made some really big pieces like this,
Mhm.
and I made some very small pieces. So I was just kind of playing with ridiculous scale at Kate's space,
Uh-huh.
which I don't know if that was a good strategy or not, but I was having fun with it. And this was the biggest piece I had made up
Yeah.
to that point. Um, and
It's
I
still domestically
probably,
scaled, though. We need to point that out to our
it is domestically scaled. Yeah, just for this show. I mean,
you
like,
can definitely purchase it and put it in your house. Really.
yes, you can. Um, no, it was just for this show. I wanted to make some really big pieces and some small. And like I said,
Right.
that was the biggest piece I'd made to date then.
Mhm.
Um, but I mean, I think this piece is in line with everything else in the show in terms of my thinking. Like I was still referencing landscape.
Mhm.
I think I was thinking a little bit more about um, just how line could take up space differently. So I love how that top piece really kind of untangles and goes up into the space and kind of dissipates into that graphite. Um, so I mean, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but it's completely in line with the other works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about grayscale in your work? You mentioned that.
Yeah, grayscale. I don't know how I started doing these grayscales. Um, I think it was because I was teaching drawing constantly, and I
Mhm.
was always teaching students grayscales. But I really liked how they started functioning as these sort of like faux backdrops for the
Mhm.
metal pieces.
Mhm.
Because there's so much spillover with the metal that I purposefully keep on there. So I like how they started. Uh, it was almost like a trompe l'oeil started happening once the grayscales started entering the metal painted
Right.
surfaces, or
Right.
the metal surfaces I was painting.
Right.
So you could have these super vibrant color relationships, like that chunk of rope of cast rope that we're looking at. But then it's against this kind of backdrop. It kind of, I feel like it confuses the viewer in a fun way, not like a deceitful way, but that
Mhm.
they're trying to grapple with the material and grapple with the reference of what they're
Well,
looking at.
of course, there's this reference to photography with regard to grayscale.
Hmm.
And, I got, does throw your color choices into relief too. One thing that's also interesting looking at this work is how your color has changed. I mean, it's always been extremely sophisticated, but very interesting here how they're a little bit more, I don't know, it maybe, yeah, I don't know. It seems like it's a little more primary, or they're more.
Yeah. Yeah, I think yeah, because this is before I'd gone into like full landscape zone
Mhm.
where there's just so much going on color-wise. And
Really?
I became really attuned to it. Like you can see in this drawing, there's so much color and activity.
Oh, that's interesting. So you think uh, working at look, I mean, obviously you don't look in plein air per se, but work in plein air, but looking at landscape has really changed your color. That's
Yeah,
really
totally. Definitely.
cool. And then this piece is one of the drawings that was in Florida, and it relates back to the kind of the last work that's in the show.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, that it's yeah. So, do you have any other, do you have any other things that you want to talk about or that we haven't discussed thus far?
I don't, not necessarily. I did see, I actually finally saw the question, and I feel like there was one I just glanced at for a second that might be a good place to end, which is someone was just asking about color, like how I paint these, what I'm thinking about with these.
Okay.
And I feel like it kind of encapsulates everything we've been talking about. And
Yeah.
this is a good piece to end it on. But just the way that I've been approaching color is from um, a few different approaches. One is like, how can I camouflage the ropes or kind of let them hide,
Hmm.
or get absorbed into color? And I feel like they really do it in this piece.
Hmm.
Like if you squint your eyes at this, it's kind of like this big, crazy, abstract blob of colors.
Hmm.
But when you focus in, you start to see these ropes, and you see the material kind of folding into itself and weaving into itself. Um, Sorry. And at other times, the paint is used to really show the rope. I think you can see it best on this one, like in those white areas where the rope is really present. So really letting the subject that was cast like be revealed.
Yeah.
And then at other times I get kind of lost in what I'm doing and start painting these like sunset scapes or painting these mountainscapes or getting lost in graphite, and I feel like that reminds me of like my drawing mentality where
Right.
you're suddenly doing something for a couple hours and you step back and realize you got really absorbed in like one space. So
Yeah.
I feel like the metal surfaces that have this relief allow for that, and the painting choices allow me to approach those surfaces in different ways.
Yeah.
And
Well,
hopefully the exhibition reveals that, not just on the metal painted pieces, but the drawings as well.
yeah. Well, I really appreciate everybody coming out today. I'm excited about 2022 and what it holds for us all. I hope that everyone has had a good break and is excited to kind of get back. Katy, thank you so much for taking the time to talk. I'm just incredibly excited about the show. Your work just gets me really excited. So I apologize if I got talked too much, but I can't.
I'm happy. Nice for it to be there.
And as I say, we are open. If you have any questions about the work, just send me an email. And we do have an opening, masked, of course, that's 2 to 5. And you're welcome to come by anytime, of course, but Katy will definitely be there during that time. And of course, you're moving to Berlin. So you're going to push me to try to do my job even better. Who knows what that means, but we'll
make you come over there.
We'll be thinking about how to get all that all figured out. So that was great, Katy. Thanks so much. And we'll talk later.